Movie video games often catch a ton of flack for not being very good. As far back as I can remember, there have been video games based on popular movies, and in this episode we will be exploring the subject on one of my favorite systems, the Sega Genesis. We will be looking at around 50 titles that I want to cover, all games tied directly to a theatrical release. I did not add TV shows or comic book video games, and we will be going down this list in rapid fire succession to manage time. I hope you guys enjoy movie video games. Are they really that bad? This 1994 action platformer was originally a Super Nintendo game done by Malibu Interactive. It was only released on the Genesis in North America by Psygnosis, in what would be a very middling experience. The graphics are fairly colorful and the animation isn't bad, but the music and sound effects do tend to grate after a while. The gameplay simply isn't very interesting, nor does it have a hook to keep you playing. Kill a few enemies, break open a few boxes, and get through the level. It's pretty standard stuff. There is a Sega CD version of it if you'd like a better soundtrack and a few bonus levels. There are two Addams Family games on the Sega Genesis, both directly tied to the movies produced in the 1990s. The first was released in late 1993, developed by Ocean Software and published by Flying Edge, a division of Acclaim. This platformer actually has some interesting gameplay, resembling a Mario game in many respects. There's power-ups that allow you to shoot projectiles and fly, and the presentation is solid with great animation and color. It would likely appeal to a younger gamer the most, but this wasn't a half-bad game at all. The sequel is a completely different experience. Released in 1995 only in Europe for the Mega Drive, Ocean would develop and publish this one, an overhead adventure game more akin to Zelda than anything else. Lots of story and exploration here, so both games kinda cater to different groups of players. One more action, the other more adventure. Neither not so terrible. (1992's) Alien 3 by Probe Software was published by Arena, yet another subsidiary of Acclaim, and was a run-and-gun winner from the moment you took control. A timer pushes you through each level that has you saving people from the dreaded aliens. Animation and music are the highlights here, in what is perhaps one of the better games Acclaim would produce for the Genesis. It's hard and requires a lot of memorization and trial and error, but a solid experience overall. In 1992, Blue Sky Software would sully the fine reputation of the Sega-Disney relationship with Ariel the Little Mermaid. Despite Disney games typically looking and sounding good on the Genesis, this engine not only looks bad, but it runs bad too. The gameplay is about as boring as a game can get, basically little more than you collecting things in a maze. Two characters that play exactly the same give little reason to care. And despite playing a bit like Echo the Dolphin, it has none of that game's challenge or higher-end design elements. It's a huge misfire that is best left in the past. In 1991, Probe Software would take a huge shit on every Genesis owner that was unfortunate enough to pay money for Back to the Future 3. Dark, soulless graphics rape your eyes, awful music assaults your hearing, and right from the moment you press start, the obscene difficulty will make you want to stop playing it immediately. Garbage like this is what gave movie games their bad rap in the first place, and I can't recommend enough that you avoid it entirely. An awful experience with absolutely nothing positive to mention. Sometimes the stars align perfectly and a movie game just kills it, and one of the first games I played to do that was 1990's Batman from Sunsoft. Great action and platforming created a solid base for the experience, and it looks pretty good too. And if that wasn't enough, Sunsoft also saw fit to give us one of the finest Genesis soundtracks ever created, the kind of stuff you sit in absolute amazement the first time you hear it. This is a winner that every Genesis owner needs in their library. When Sega took over the Batman license, their first game was 1993's Batman Returns, developed by Malibu Interactive. I hate this game with a passion. Not just because it wasn't as good as the Sunsoft effort, but also because Sega should have done it in-house to begin with. Everything about this fails to appeal to me. The dark and colorless graphics looks far worse than it should, and the sound is just point-blank awful. The gameplay is asinine too, with Batman not only having to deal with enemies, but also stupid environment dangers that are placed in areas for no other reason than to keep your deaths coming to extend its horrendous gameplay. A Sega CD version of this with cool driving sections redeems the property a bit, but as far as the standalone Genesis game, it's a big letdown and nowhere near the quality of the previous Sunsoft release. If Sega's attempt at Batman was a disappointment, Probe Entertainment's Batman Forever was a full-on shitting of the bed. Published in 1995, Acclaim jumped on the bandwagon of digitizing everything like Mortal Kombat, but apparently forgot to put a little effort into the gameplay as well. Awkward animations, slow and plodding combat, and music and sound effects that everyone involved should be ashamed of define this awful title. It makes Batman Returns seem like a damn masterpiece. In 1993, Sunsoft devised a strange strategy of breaking up the Beauty and the Beast license across two simultaneous releases. The first of these is Roar of the Beast, an action game that was aimed at boys. Despite looking pretty good, the gameplay is just terrible. The limited attacks you have help little against the onslaught of enemies you face, and you'll get sick of this pretty fast. It lacks any interesting changes as the game progresses, so you'll find yourself doing the same thing over and over, more akin to the games of the mid-1980s and not the stuff being released in 1993. The second title, Belle's Quest, was aimed squarely at girls, but suffers even more than the other game. Here, poor Belle can't even attack, instead just able to jump and duck and hide. There's elements here the other game doesn't have, like mini-games and character interactions, but with nothing really to do but walk around, you lose interest pretty damn fast. Bram Stoker's Dracula was released in 1993 by Sony ImageSoft and developed jointly by Psygnosis and Traveler's Tales. Simple gameplay mechanics and uninspired visuals pretty much sum up this entire experience. Nothing about this one is awful or worth beating up. There's just simply not a lot to do here or get excited about. Jumping around killing spiders, bats, and rats can only be but so fun, especially with nothing really changing level to level. It does have a weirdly appealing soundtrack, but outside of that, this one is a skipper. Genesis owners were victimized by Malibu Interactive yet again with 1993's Cliffhanger. Based on the Sylvester Stallone action flick, this is a predictable beat-em-up with poor mechanics and bland environments. The use of the GEM sound driver is put to effective use here, blaring its screeches and squeals into each ear, guaranteeing hearing loss of some kind for everyone that experiences it. A Sega CD game was released as well with the bog standard editions of full motion video sequences and ridiculously difficult forward scrolling levels. Multi-platform mediocrity in all its glory. In 1995, the awful film Cutthroat Island got its very own game, courtesy of Software Creations and Acclaim, a side-scrolling hack and slash with mundane visuals and an equally weak soundtrack. You won't find many Genesis games that play as poorly either, making this disaster an all-around fail in every category. It's rare you'll hear me say a game has no value at all, but Cutthroat Island comes damn close to that dishonor. In perhaps a shocking turn of events for an Acclaim release, 1995's Demolition Man is actually not a bad game at all. It was developed by Alexandria and uses both side-scrolling and overhead perspectives to deal out its run-and-gun gameplay. Solid animation is present throughout, and even the stage design looks pretty good. It reminds me a bit of both Alien 3 and the Terminator, and has some of the best voice samples on the hardware. The Sega CD version has a completely different soundtrack and full motion video scenes, but is otherwise the same game.
Send the maniac to catch one.
Sega of America would develop and release 1991's Dick Tracy. I rather enjoyed this game because it played a lot like eSWAT and a few other Japanese-developed games. You get enemies coming at you from both a forward and background plane that keeps things hectic and always giving you something to beat up or shoot at. The detailed and colorful graphics look outstanding, and Sega even nailed a halfway faithful soundtrack. One of their better efforts and very much worth your time. Aladin came along in late 1993, a collaboration between Virgin Games and Disney Software, with Sega publishing it. Gorgeous animation and color are the highlights here, backed up by responsive gameplay that gives you all sorts of things to play around with. Only its soundtrack disappoints, but I can't hold that against it when everything else is this well done. Super late in the life of the Genesis, we'd get Pinocchio in late 1996, another collaboration between Disney and Virgin Interactive. One would assume that giving this title's late release and the property on which it's based, that it wouldn't be very good. I made that very assumption, but I was completely wrong. Pinocchio here is actually a really solid game. You get large, extremely well animated sprites, some decent gameplay, and even a few different characters to play as. Only the silly dance sections are a real problem. It isn't the best of the Disney properties, but it's far from the worst. I definitely recommend you at least give it a try. Acclaim's deluge of software continued on the Genesis with 1994's Dragon: The Bruce Lee Story. This is set up with scenes from the movie and plays out as a fighting game. Some nice parallax and line scrolling effects punctuate each of these stages, but the gameplay is rather simple, with more in common with older games like Street Smart than something like Street Fighter. Fights go on for too long and I got really bored with this after a while. Still, it isn't bad for what it is, and can definitely be fun for younger gamers. In 1994, famed strategy game developer Westwood Studios would develop Dune: The Battle for Arrakis for the Genesis. This is based on the PC game Dune 2, and the Genesis conversion is exceptional for a console-based strategy game. Choose one of 3 factions, or houses in this case, and get out there and secure your resources and protect them at all cost. This is one of the few implementations of the GEMS sound driver that is really good, giving the rather plain Jane visual presentation some much needed help. Of course, in the years since its release there have been better strategy games, but in 1994 this was absolutely awesome. A Sega CD version exists as well, but that's an adventure game that has nothing to do with the cartridge version. Thanks for watching part 1 of my Sega Genesis movie special. A link to part 2 will be in the description. Please check that out to see more Sega Genesis movie games. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.